The air was heavy with anticipation, and the rippling waters of the Stockholm harbor glistened beneath the August sun. The towering warship Vasa, the pride of Sweden's naval fleet, stood poised for its maiden voyage, its decks crowded with sailors and its magnificent sails billowing in the breeze. The crowd gathered along the shore cheered as the ship began to glide into the harbor, but their joy soon gave way to an eerie silence. As a sudden gust of wind filled the grand sails, the Vasa tilted ominously. A creaking sound echoed through the air, and the ship lurched to one side, the mighty cannons within groaning under the strain. The open gun ports, meant to signal strength, became a death sentence as seawater poured in, faster than anyone could react. The onlookers watched, helpless, as the towering vessel, their king's prized warship, began to sink, swallowed by the very waters that were meant to carry it to victory. For a moment, the harbor was still, save for the distant cries of those struggling in the cold waters. The ship was gone, its secrets buried beneath the waves. But as the crowd dispersed in stunned silence, whispers began to spread through the city. How could such a grand creation meet such a tragic end? Was it a simple miscalculation, or something more sinister? The unanswered questions, the murmurs of curses, and the lost souls trapped within the wreck would haunt Sweden for centuries. The mighty Vasa was meant to rule the seas, but instead, it vanished into a watery grave, taking its mysteries with it. In the early 17th century, Sweden was an ambitious kingdom. Under the rule of King Gustavus Adolphus, the country was expanding its territories and seeking dominance over the Baltic Sea. The king had dreams of transforming Sweden into a military power, one capable of standing toe-to-toe with the major European nations. To achieve this, he needed a fleet that would not only defend Swedish interests, but also project strength across the seas. The Vasa was to be the crown jewel of that fleet. Its construction began in 1626, under the supervision of master shipbuilder Henrik Hybertson, who had been commissioned by the king himself. The ship was to carry 64 bronze cannons, an unprecedented number for its size, spread across 2 gun decks. It was also adorned with ornate carvings and decorations, including a majestic lion figurehead at its bow, symbolizing the Swedish monarchy's power and might. However, the king's ambitious vision also brought about challenges. The ship's design was altered several times during its construction, often at the behest of the king, who demanded more cannons and taller structures to display Sweden's naval dominance. These constant changes to the plans would ultimately prove to be the ship's undoing, though few could have predicted the extent of the disaster that lay ahead. Despite the mounting concerns over the ship's stability, the king's orders were absolute. The Vasa was to be ready for war, no matter the cost. August 10th, 1628, was a day of celebration. Thousands gathered along the shores of Stockholm to witness the maiden voyage of the Vasa. It was a spectacle of royal pride and naval grandeur, with trumpets blaring and flags waving. The ship, standing tall at over 50 meters from keel to mast, was a sight to behold. Its cannons gleamed in the sunlight, and the intricate carvings that adorned the stern were a testament to Swedish craftsmanship and artistry. As the Vasa slowly made its way out of the harbor, the crowd erupted in cheers. It was a moment of national pride, a display of Sweden's growing naval power. The ship's captain, Solfring Hansen, stood confidently on the deck, proud of the vessel he commanded. But beneath the surface, there were growing concerns among the crew. Many sailors had noticed the ship's tendency to sway, even in calm waters, and some had expressed fears that the vessel might not be as seaworthy as it appeared. But there was no turning back now. The king's orders were clear. The Vasa was to set sail and join the fleet in the Baltic. As the ship moved further out into the harbor, a light breeze caught its sails, and for a brief moment, the Vasa sailed with grace and power. But then, without warning, a stronger gust of wind filled the sails, causing the ship to lean sharply to one side. The crew scrambled to adjust the sails and regain control, but it was too late. The ship continued to list, its lower gun ports dangerously close to the waterline. Then, in an instant, disaster struck. The ship tipped further, and water began to pour into the open gun ports. The weight of the water rushing in was too much for the already unstable ship to bear. Within minutes, the Vasa was sinking into the depths of the harbor, taking with it more than 30 crew members who were unable to escape the fast-sinking vessel. Onlookers could only watch in horror as the pride of the Swedish Navy disappeared beneath the waves. The sinking of the Vasa sent shockwaves throughout Sweden. How could such a powerful warship meet such a tragic end on its maiden voyage in the calm waters of Stockholm Harbor? The loss was not only a blow to Sweden's naval ambitions, but also a personal humiliation for King Gustavus Adolphus, who had invested so much in the ship's construction. An inquest was launched to determine the cause of the disaster, and fingers were quickly pointed at those responsible for the ship's design and construction. Shipbuilder Henrik Hybertson, who had passed away before the ship was completed, was initially blamed for the ship's faulty design. But as more details emerged, it became clear that the ship's instability was the result of a combination of factors, including the king's own demands for more cannons and a taller ship. Yet, even with these explanations, rumors began to circulate. Some whispered that the Vasa had been cursed, its construction plagued by bad omens from the start. Others spoke of sabotage, suggesting that enemies of the king had somehow tampered with the ship to ensure its failure. Still others believed that the ship's destruction was divine punishment, a warning from God against Sweden's growing militarism. For years, the wreck of the Vasa remained at the bottom of Stockholm Harbor, a haunting reminder of the dangers of ambition and hubris. Divers attempted to recover the ship's cannons, but the bulk of the ship remained lost beneath the waters, its mysteries left to the cold, dark depths. More than 3 centuries later, in 1956, the wreck of the Vasa was rediscovered by Swedish marine archaeologist Anders Franzen. His search for the ship had been driven by a fascination with naval history and the belief that the cold, brackish waters of the Baltic might have preserved the wreck. When Franzen finally located the Vasa, he was astonished to find that much of the ship was still intact. The subsequent efforts to raise the ship were nothing short of monumental. In 1961, after years of preparation, the Vasa was lifted from the depths and brought to the surface for the first time in over 300 years. The world watched in awe as the ship emerged from its watery grave, remarkably well preserved despite its centuries-long submersion. As the ship was carefully restored, archaeologists and historians began to uncover the secrets of the Vasa and its ill-fated voyage. The ship's design flaws became apparent. The hull was too narrow, the center of gravity too high, and the ballast too light to support the massive weight of the cannons and the ship's towering masts. It was a disaster waiting to happen. But alongside these technical revelations, there were also discoveries that fueled the darker, more mysterious aspects of the ship's story. Personal items recovered from the wreck, clothing, coins, tools, painted a picture of the lives lost in the tragedy. The remains of some of the sailors were also found, their bones a silent testament to the disaster that had claimed them. Yet even with these tangible discoveries, the Vasa still held on to some of its mysteries. The exact reasons for its instability remained a subject of debate, and the eerie stillness of the ship's final moments continued to haunt those who studied its fate. Today, the Vasa stands as a museum piece, preserved in a specially constructed building in Stockholm. Visitors from around the world come to see the ship, marveling at its size, its craftsmanship, and the tragic story it represents. But for some, the ship remains more than just a historical artifact. There are those who claim that the ship is haunted, that the souls of the sailors who perished on that fateful day in 1628 still linger within the ship's timbers. Staff at the Vasa Museum have reported strange occurrences over the years: unexplained sounds, sudden drops in temperature, and the feeling of being watched. Some visitors have even claimed to see ghostly figures on the ship's decks, their faces pale and their eyes wide with fear, as if reliving the final moments before the ship sank. Whether these stories are the result of overactive imaginations or something more supernatural remains unknown. Yet the eerie atmosphere surrounding the Vasa cannot be denied. Standing before the massive hull, one can't help but feel the weight of history and the tragedy that hangs in the air. The Vasa, once a symbol of power and ambition, now serves as a reminder of the fragility of human endeavors and the thin line between triumph and disaster. For centuries, the Vasa lay forgotten beneath the waves, a testament to hubris and miscalculation. But now it has returned to the world, bringing with it its mysteries, its history, and perhaps its ghosts.